Well, welcome, my Shield brothers and sisters, to another little episode of The Political Viking. You can find more of our stuff at thepoliticalviking.com, which includes tons of links and information to all the various conservative websites, as well as some good videos and some links to our podcasts. This is just a little ancillary thing we like to do, and hopefully enjoy it. This week, we want to talk just a moment about sort of the new economics and the relationship between critical race theory and these new economics, because they are interrelated. Because once you understand that what's going on politically in the United States, for the most part, from the far left, is not to fix things, it's not to tweak the system or anything, it's to revolutionize it. It's essentially to tear it down in the hope that you can create something else, something that is a lot better, because so many of the people on the progressive left are so much smarter than Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, John Adams, people like that. They just, they're sort of plodding along. So they want to tear it down. And so most of the things that you see that are coming out as major programs aren't meant to really fix anything. They're meant to either change things completely or cause things to implode. And inflation is sort of a part of that. It's why some of the people on the progressive left really aren't all that concerned about inflation. After all, I mean, most of it should be. I mean, when we get a pound of bacon and it's costing us, $8 or something like that, we tend to notice things like that. So, and filling up the gas tank, I mean, even as I speak that, it's $1 more than it was just a year ago, and it's going to get higher. Probably this summer, we'll see another 20 or 30 cents a gallon added to that, depending on where you are. So why isn't inflation a big concern to everybody, including progressives? Well, that's because high inflation tends to destroy capitalism. And how does it do that? Because it devalues capital. If you have savings out there, like some people do, all you lucky people, you rich people that actually have a savings account or are trying to put some money away for retirement, if you're listening to some of this new economic theory, you're taking advantage of someone, although how that's happening, it's pretty unclear, but certainly you're entitled. Right? You're privileged in some way because you have savings, because you're putting things away for retirement account. And so inflation tends to eat away at that. And eventually it gets to the point where it just isn't worth hardly anything. Think about this. If you have $10,000 in the savings account and you're getting zero interest or close to zero interest, like most people do on that, if they have it in a checking account or something, then that's not just sitting there, is it? Because with inflation, say inflation is 7.2%, something like that, that means it's not just sitting there, it's losing. It's like a balloon and the air is slowly going out of it. And the balloon of your retirement or your savings, whatever you're doing, is slowly getting smaller and smaller. Well, the hope with some of this new economic theory is that inflation continues. It makes everybody even because the government will just continue to pump money out. And as inflation goes up, the money will just keep pumping out. Let's give you more of it. It'll be worth less individually, but we'll make more of it. What that does do is it destroys the money that's been sitting in people's pockets or their bank accounts or something like that over time. So eventually the system collapses in terms of what we think of as capitalism, and everybody becomes dependent on some sort of constant feed from the government of some sort of money. Who knows what it'll look like by that point? Might look like, pineapples painted on it. Who knows? I mean, we're becoming sort of like a sort of Caribbean country, where our money's made out of zinc and our let's see, our, I want to say dollars, but let's say our printed folding money is got pineapples and sailboats and, maybe sharks swimming on it, because it really has no intrinsic value and it just gets pumped out all the time. So when you do that, the system has to change. And the whole idea of banking and the concentration of capital disappears. I mean, that's the theory. So if you're someone that's worth all this money, and you're controlling things through the use of that money, the money becomes worthless after a while or next to worthless. And because they have this narrow nitwit idea about it, they think there are no other consequences from that. They think that it will destroy the capital system, the concentration of capital will disappear because the capital that you have isn't worth as much. Unfortunately, inflation isn't that simple. It has a situation where people become alarmed at seeing things constantly escalating. And there's no way that you could print money faster than inflation goes up, since the printing of money makes inflation go up even faster. So you're in a race to nowhere when you do that. Yeah, you may bring the system down, but you don't have a way to fix it under that scenario. So what will happen is that you get everyone to the point where they feel like there's no hope, and they begin to look around for someone that has a really good idea about how to fix things. And that really good idea is usually some sort of autocracy. The people pushing this idea that think that far ahead probably hope it's them that you choose. History shows that it's usually not them. They're usually the ones that are lined up outside a wall by the people that are now in charge, the revolutionaries who eventually take over, and the people that are being lined up who were behind the original insurrection of the taking away capital and doing things like that. They're being lined up for a photograph, and they're not. So it doesn't turn out as well for them as you would think. But by then, we're all in a real mess. So inflation has destroyed many countries. It destroyed, obviously, 1933, the Weimar Republic, Germany. That's the one we think of most of the time. But it also affected Rome all the way back into the ancient world. And their inflation was the same way. They would just print money when they needed it, except that what they did was they debased the actual currency because they didn't really hand out paper dollars or papal denarii or whatever else they were using. They would give coinage, and the coins used to have some sort of value based on the precious metals that were in them. Well, as you got more and more sneaky, you began to debase that. And instead of being pure silver, silver, maybe a little zinc, what else ever comes along, maybe some copper in there if nobody notices it. Gold was the same way. And then they could also do it by making them a tiny bit smaller. And it used to be a process way up until, the 18th century that you would shave money, right? People wouldn't notice that you would get, say, a silver dollar, let's say, and you could shave the edges off of just a tiny bit. Now you get enough of those, and you take your file and file off a little bit of each one and melt it down. Got some extra money there. That's one of the reasons on some of our coinage that we see that still has those ridges around the edge of it. Because if you shave that off, somebody knows that currency's been messed with, right? So that's why we have that. It's the same thing. Meantime, progressive politicians are out there filing away at the money in the hopes that it will cause a system to reset itself, to destroy the concentration of capital some other way. Some politicians, by the way, also like inflation because it lets them pay their debt with dollars, in our case, dollars, that are worth less than the dollars they borrowed, right? So if you had borrowed $100 3 years ago, and you remember what $100 would buy 3 years ago, and then next year, if things keep up, you pay it back with dollars that you earned then, which dollar do you think buys more? The dollar you borrowed 3 years ago bought more than the dollar you're using to pay it back now. So people who've borrowed a lot in the past like the idea of paying it back with cheaper money, because that's what it is. So there's a lot of other reasons out there besides just what we see as consumers when we're just trying to put our lives together. So be aware of that the next time you hear someone talking about, oh, don't worry about inflation, or really borrowing money from ourselves, or some other pea-brained idea that you see some of these morons out there that either are just legitimately stupid or are trying to, in some way, bring the system spiraling to something that they can get their arms around and change, not in a way that's going to benefit us. We'll see you later, folks. Political Viking, we're sailing away for just a few more days. Take care.